So what I'm going to talk about is focused on the work I do, which is research looking at the animals that have been through trauma of some sort or another. And, of course, the topic for today will be the puppy mill and the hoarding rescue animals. Okay, so we're going to look at the physical and the psychological effects of these different kinds of situations that these animals have to live through. And, of course, we'll start here with puppy mills. First, just by name, commercial breeding establishment, that's the name we chose to use for the paper we published on this. But also there's other names, high-volume breeder, large-scale breeding facility. They call themselves everything but puppy mills for obvious reasons. Professional kennels is another one you hear a lot. But they're all puppy mills. And just to be clear, my definition of puppy mill, which actually isn't exactly the same as best friends, but this is the better one. So any dog breeding facility that keeps so many dogs that the needs of the breeding dogs and puppies are not met sufficiently to provide a reasonably decent quality of life for all the animals. And what this avoids, of course, is that difficult problem of how many animals, how many dogs does it require by number to be a puppy mill. And this, by this definition, you could have 10 animals and be a puppy mill. Okay, so who gets hurt out of this whole thing? You already know this, but there's three groups of dogs: the breeding dogs, the puppies, and the shelter dogs. I don't have to tell you why shelter dogs are hurt by this. We're only going to be talking about the breeding dogs today, but I will mention that we recently finished our study on the puppies that are sold through pet stores compared with dogs bought elsewhere, and it was accepted by DACVIM for publication, but they lost some editors, so I guess that whole process is going to take forever, so it'll be forever before you see the paper. But anyway, so we were able to document that dogs bought through pet stores have serious problems compared to other dogs from other sources when they grow up to be adults. So it'll be sort of a double whammy on getting these puppy mill facilities either rectified or shut down. So let's look at the breeding dogs. First of all, the obvious thing, how are they harmed? Well, physical and psychological. I'm going to skip the physical because I don't really have time for it, but you kind of all know what that is. They have everything from ravaging skin diseases to the worst problem they have is dental disease. Some of the dogs come out and they lose all their teeth, but some lose more than that. Some lose half their jaw and erodes through, and it's really, really ugly, and these poor dogs have to live with it because the breeders generally don't care as long as they're pumping out the puppies. Same goes for skin. They come out heavily matted, the ones with long hair, and it's really a terrible mess. I'm sure you've all seen what it's like to trim down a dog with that much hair coat on it. You just lift that whole shell right off them. And of course, it's not just ugly, but underneath, horrendous things happen. The pyodermas, and even just having an itch that they can't scratch. The other thing is, as you probably all know, the more hair mats, the more things get glued together. So these dogs very often have their limbs glued to their body. They can't move them. And then it'll cover the anus sometimes so that they can't even push out a bowel movement. It's really messy. But anyway, I think you all know that. So what I want to do is talk about where my focus has been, and that is the psychological harm of the puppy mills. When I came to Best Friends, there were a few things that I posed as questions to myself that didn't have answers. First of all, what are the psychological and behavioral characteristics of dogs who have been confined in puppy mills? How many of the dogs show abnormalities? This is related to the issue in people that when 100 people go through the same trauma, only a certain percentage, and it's usually around 15 to 20%, suffer long-term psychological scars. Now, that can be combat warfare, it can be living through Katrina, it can be 9/11. All of them have about the same. The only one that's different is sexual assault on women, where it's more around 50% carry lifelong scars. And that doesn't mean that the ones that aren't scarred don't remember it. Obviously they do, and it's very unpleasant, but it doesn't affect day-to-day function in a really bad way. How severe are the abnormalities? How long-lasting are they? Are they reversible? How many dogs self-recover and how many need rehabilitative treatment? What are the most effective treatments? And then real importantly for us, and I'm sure all of you, is how does the harm that they suffer affect the adoption relationship and success? And of course, what I'm talking about is if they are psychologically scarred, which I will show you they are, does that impact their success in their adoptive households? And I have the answer to that we'll talk about. Actually, that'll be the third talk. So this is the title of the study, which then became the title of the paper. We looked at 1,169 dogs that had been rescued from being breeders in puppy mills that had gotten out one way or another. And we used James Serpel, and Deb Duffy and James Serpel are both at the University of Pennsylvania. We used James Seabark, which is, as you may know, an extensive psychological behavioral questionnaire for dogs. Here's all the breeds that we dealt with in the study. Just real quickly, I think you all know this. Most puppy mill dogs are small breeds. You'll see a few on that list if you can see that small lettering, like golden retrievers, where larger breeds sometimes have quite a few. The Bichons, 343, was about 10 times every other breed. And that was because we had a lady at a rescue, Small Paws Rescue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who just hounded, no pun intended, hounded the people that had adopted her dogs until they just, couldn't put it off anymore, and so they had to enter. So the Bichon's far overrepresented as far as puppy mill dogs. Okay, so one important thing that I want to mention before I give you what we found is how long were these dogs in their adoptive households? This is critical because, of course, if we did the study 1 week after they'd all landed in their adoptive households, they're all going to be terrified like any new dog in a new household. So this question we asked, and of course those are the multiple choices on the left, and this is the answers that we got back. The vast majority were 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 5 years in that household. And the mean was 2 years in that household. And I'll probably reiterate this as I go through because it's real important that what I'm going to show you is a snapshot of the dogs at roughly 2 years into their house. Plenty of time, in other words, to adjust and their actual personalities to emerge. So the first thing that we found is fear levels, dramatic in comparison to non-puppy mill dogs. And the pet dogs that we compared them to is the data bank that James Serpel has collected at the Seabark site, which is about 15,000 dogs over the last 15 years or so. So we matched them for everything from sex to breed and everything like that. But the point is, these are normal, whatever that word means, pet dogs compared to puppy mill dogs. So fear of unfamiliar people. This is, of course, when you have one of these adoptive pets in your dogs in your house, and you invite a neighbor or friend in, that's an unfamiliar person or stranger. So, backwards, sorry. So pet dogs showed, and by the way, all the scales go up to 4, but as you may know, if you work PowerPoint, when you make a graph, it always scales it down to the top value, so it's 2.5. Anyway, so pet dogs have a very low level, and this is what we found in puppy mill dogs, a 215% increase, which is astronomical. And let me iterate, before I reiterate, the fact that what we're looking at is a group of dogs. For example, and the reason that's important is that not every dog has that level of fear. Some has much higher, some have much lower. This is the average, of course. And it's like if you looked at 100 combat soldiers that came back and judged their psychological makeup compared with the normal population, they would have very high levels of certain things too. But of course, we all know some of those soldiers are perfectly fine and others are devastated. So we're looking at an average of the groups here. So fear of other dogs, this was interesting. I wanted to know what this was because, as you may know, puppy mill dogs are almost always housed in groups. It saves the operators a lot of money that way, but they're usually small breeds, which are very profitable when they sell them. So in their life with other dogs, if we're worried about dogs being socialized with other dogs, you can't get any more socialized than spending your whole life with other dogs. So when they come out, are they more or less fearful of other dogs? And this is what we found. They're actually more fearful than your standard dog of other dogs. And what apparently explains this is that if you look at your household and you have like 10 dogs or whatever, and then 2 of them get into a fight and another one's real nervous about that, that third one can run off and escape. Or either 2 in the fight can run off and escape. In a puppy mill, they have nowhere to go. So what happens is under any conflict, tension, anything, they are stuck there. And I always kind of joke here that if I were to leave here, lock the doors, come back in 2 years and let you guys out, you probably wouldn't be all that friendly with other people, you know. That's just the way it is. You have no way to diffuse situations. So that's probably what we're looking at here. Non-social fear is all the fear of non-social, meaning inanimate type objects, a bicycle going by, noises, all that. So it's pretty much all of life except for the other living bodies around you. And we found this likewise astronomically elevated in puppy mill dogs. And once again, I won't say this too many times, but I just want to stress, this is 2 years into their household. They've had more than enough time to adapt to everything going on. Okay, so in the comment section, I found a lot of words repeating themselves. By the way, those are all multiple choice where they rate fear levels in their dogs. But we leave a comment section, and I found a lot of repetitive words that you'll all recognize real quickly. Skittish was the most common. Startles easily, always on alert, on edge, on guard, or hyper alert. I grouped some of these that are similar. Overly reactive, jumpy, easily unnerved, frightened, scared, spooked, or panicked, frightened by sudden or quick movements or sounds, and then the really sad ones, frightened of everything or almost everything, and frightened all the time under any circumstances. These are the real tragic cases that just live in this state of fear that they cannot escape from no matter what we try to do. This is Boomer, just one example of one of these dogs and what happens to them when they're in the mill. Since adoption 6 months earlier, and I say 6 months earlier than when I went to his house to take this photo, he stays in the far corner of the backyard, runs away from all humans, including his adoptive parents, barks constantly, urinates freely in the house. The wife told me I can't get near enough him to housebreak him, which when you think about it is difficult. If you can't get within 12 feet of the dog, you can neither praise them nor discourage them, because if you try to use a loud voice, as I'll show you, it just terrifies them more. And in fact, the husband tried to offer a treat by tossing a treat, and I quoted him, you'd have thought he was being pelted by rocks. That's how terrified he was of anything like that. And hasn't formed any bond with any person in 6 months. And this is as close as I could get with a zoom lens. If I walked any closer, he would try to run past me into the next room where he could hide. So obviously I didn't do that to him, but he was just living in this constant state of terror. Sensitivity to touch, that means being touched by human hands or picked up, held, hugged, on the lap, all of those things. And we found that compared to pet dogs, puppy mill dogs are much more sensitive. And I'll read you some of the descriptions by people who describe this. But it's pretty difficult. You know, we all have the inclination of wanting to just hug and love these animals and make them feel better, but it's terrifying. Cognitive abilities and mental focus. The one that demonstrates some changes here is the staring at nothing, which people that adopt puppy mill dogs have described in many ways. Blank stare, dazed look, zoned out, lights on, nobody's home, all of those things that you've heard before. And it was no surprise that they show that significantly more than pet dogs. Trainability, this is the one you can all guess. And the fact that this is no surprise, I should just mention the only surprise here is that it's not lower than that in terms of being less trainable than normal pet dogs. Here's some written-in descriptions about certain cognitive functions that these dogs have. Always seems like she's in another world. Will put his front feet on the wall and stare at the wall. Attention span of a flea. Not aggressive, not friendly, just there. At times, she seems to regress into unknown fears. She has doggy dementia, gets disoriented, seldom shows any emotion at all. She's very stoic, has unprovoked and unexplained temper tantrums, and if he were human, he would be autistic. And we'll come back to that autistic comment a little bit later. Now, a lot of stereotypic behavior follows these dogs out and can stay with them for years. This didn't categorize anything in particular in terms of unusual stereotype behavior, but we found, to no surprise, that they are well elevated above normal dogs. And this particular dog here does one of the common things. She's a circler. And that's what she'll do all day long. Sometimes they'll do wide circles like she's doing here. Other times they'll do tight little circles the way they would do them if they were still in their cage. We call them spinners, not because it's a cutesy name, but because it really describes them. But the real troubling thing, of course, is that when you have one of these dogs and it's spinning or circling, most often you can't stop that. And that's very frustrating for the adoptive owners to want to comfort the dog and make them stop doing this, but they very often can't. And we know from some recent research on repetitive and compulsive type behaviors is that there's a beneficial brain effect to certain stereotypies, and that by doing them, and this is true, by the way, for people with OCD, you actually can put your mind at ease. It'll release endorphins. So actually trying to stop this sounds like the logical thing to do, but we may not want to. They may actually be getting benefit and ease their own anxiety. Here's some written-in descriptions for the repetitive type behaviors, and they're quite diverse. Creates imaginary line that he won't cross, obsessively runs back and forth in the yard until worn out, jumps and rolls on the floor and slams body on floor, moves forelegs in a stepping position while standing in the same spot, sometimes rips her own hair out. Her toys must be in order. She will count them and pace if one is gone. Self-mutilates, licks the air, often sucks on cotton fabrics, towels, blankets, and throws his body into walls. So you can see there's just a wide array of abnormal behaviors that come out. What about aggression? Well, this is where things get interesting. This is, I already showed you here, the fear of the dogs, of other dogs, is elevated compared to normal pet dogs. What about aggression towards other dogs? Well, here's what we found. It's only about half as much. They're not nearly as aggressive as just your standard typical dog. By the way, that's a little misleading because, as I mentioned, the scales in PowerPoint are scaled down. That's a scale that goes up to 4. So don't look at that like all these dogs are vicious, attacking everybody. That's actually not that high, but the comparison is what we're interested in compared to puppy mill dogs. How about this? We saw that the elevation of fear of unfamiliar people is sky high. What about their aggression towards unfamiliar people? Well, very similar. It's about half as much as you find in just standard pet dogs. And what about owner-directed aggression? Once again, we've got also less of that in rescued puppy mill dogs than we have in standard pet dogs. So I grouped them all together here just so you can see a very interesting finding. And I don't know how interesting it is because we'd need to do more studies, but it's the aggression level for every possible level of aggression that we tested for was almost exactly half of what it was, whatever it was for people or for normal pet dogs. Just a couple of comments here in the comments section. Does your dog show any aggression towards strangers? No aggression, she just runs away and hides. This puppy mill dog has fear instead of aggression. She's afraid. Not aggressive, she's in total fear. This dog is afraid of her own shadow. She only wants to get away. So what what we're looking at here is if you look at the normal dog, for that matter, it could be normal mammal, us included, and that is under threat, there's a fight or flight response that's fairly balanced. But what these dogs come out of puppy mills like is this incredible bias of a bias towards flight as opposed to fight. And, it's hard to tell exactly why this is, but it probably relates to the fact that when you are aggressive, there's always got to be a way out. If you start something aggressive, there's got to be a way to escape if things go out of control. And therefore, if you learn real quick that you can never escape retaliation, then you are probably going to shut down your aggression mode. Well, as we know from puppy mill dogs, they can't escape anything. So if they attack their cage mate, they have nowhere to go if that cage mate strikes back, or if every dog in the group there piles on. So they come out, or they would develop less tendency then to be aggressive. And that's just a theory. I can't prove it, of course, but it's probably what's happening. All right, this one, not that relevant, but it is by far the biggest abnormality, and that is their reluctance to use stairs. It's not always the same from dog to dog, interestingly enough. Some dogs won't get near stairs no matter what. Others will go up but not down. Others will go down but not up. So it's quite different. And the only relevance, really, is when these are large breed dogs that come out of the puppy mills, because obviously the little breed dogs are pretty easy to carry in and out of a house or something like that. But when you've got a Great Dane that's reluctant to use stairs and you have just 3 stairs to get out your back door, it can be a problem. All right, now, other than aggression, they score better than normal pet dogs in 2 areas. One is chasing, and this can be chasing anything, a bicycle or a ball or anything like that. They only do it at about half the level. Now, this is pretty easy to speculate why this would be, too. There's 2 reasons. One is that it requires a certain sense of confidence to chase something. In other words, if you're fearful and you just want to scare something off, but you don't go run, run, run. And so these dogs come out in general with sky-high fear levels, so their ability to chase is diminished because of that. The other one is probably the more obvious, and that is they don't have any concept of chasing. They've never chased anything. They've been in this little tiny box with other dogs. I suppose they could run circles around there, but the concept of throwing a ball and the dog chasing it is completely foreign to them. So they don't chase much, which is good, but for a bad reason. Likewise, pulling on a leash, they don't pull on a leash as much as normal pet dogs. And this is also relatively easy to figure out. They've never been on a leash. And although it seems obvious to us that all you need to do is hook up a dog to a leash and they just walk along, the problem with pulling on a leash is that we take for granted that a collar and you pulling with your neck against something is natural. But if you've never done it in your life and all of a sudden somebody expects you to use your neck to pull something, you're probably not going to do it. And that's why these dogs probably don't pull against a leash. So that was a very, very fast run-through of a part of the paper that we wrote. What I found, though, is that a lot of people that filled out that lengthy questionnaire emailed me and said, I just filled out your long questionnaire, but you didn't ask a single question about my dog. And what it turns out is that the CBARC, being designed to kind of collect all information about all dogs, does not focus on any one type of dog. And that's the way James designed it, so that it would reach a lot of pet owners. But just like people with certain psychological abnormalities, if everybody with every psychiatric problem took the same test, some would be more informative than others. Anyway, long story short, what I did then is I devised an entirely different second questionnaire and asked people if they'd be willing to fill it out. And out of the 1,169 original dogs, we got 878 dogs entered in the second one, and this is where I focused a lot more on problems that were specific for puppy mill dogs. There's question 5. Dogs, like people, have different desires and abilities to socialize with others. Please check the choice that comes closest to describing your dog's sociability when he or she arrived in your household. And I gave them a number of choices. sociable and friendly towards people and dogs, sociable and friendly toward people but not dogs, sociable and friendly towards dogs but not people, not sociable or friendly to either, very selective in the people but very friendly to other dogs, and very selective to the people and not friendly to other dogs. And this is what we got back. The large majority are selective in the people and very friendly towards other dogs. Luckily, some of the bad ones, like unfriendly towards people but not dogs, were low. But the other ones have problems, and that is being selective for or against dogs or people, and you'll see that in some of the upcoming slides too. The other thing that a lot of people told us on the questionnaire is that he only bonded to me, or he only bonded to me and my husband and no one else. So on the second questionnaire, I asked them to please describe the bonding, emotional attachment your dog has made with people, and then he or she is bonded with, and those are the choices. Only one person, only two, more than two, which is what we want. No humans but dogs, no humans and not dogs. And this is what we got for that, is that it is real common for them to bond with just one or two people. That is what we want them all to be able to do, but a lot of them do that. Now, I have to admit some stupidity on my part here, because a lot of people that answered this question in the comment section mentioned that they wrote down that he only bonded with one person, but I'm the only one in the house. And it didn't dawn on me that that would happen. So that only one person or even only two people might be a little bit more elevated than the dog would choose if they had more choices. But from the comments that we got, it's clear that these dogs are very likely to bond with just a few people. Oh, in fact, I left some comments on here. She is bonded with my husband and myself and with the other dogs in the house, but not with my adult children or strangers. She's not bonded in any sense of a normal pet. In her own way, she accepts me as her caregiver, but does not show any form of feelings for me. I have no doubt that she loves me, but in her own abnormal way. She does not come to me when I approach her to pick her up, and she backs up, cowers down like I'm going to hit or hurt her. I'm the only person on earth in her eyes. She's definitely dependent on me and shows her appreciation of me. I am her world. He isn't bonded to either of us, but he will now lay on the couch next to us and allow us to stroke or scratch him. It took me 2 months to be able to touch Apricot, and now, after almost 8 years, I'm still the only one who can touch her. She screams when anyone else tries to approach her or pick her up. She poops when they try to pick her up, too. So, these dogs that go through this trauma, and this is true for people, too, very often have difficulties coping with just standard change in life. So in this question, I just asked them, how well does your dog cope with change? And this is not very surprising. Not very many, very well. Quite a few moderately, and quite a few not very, and then very poorly was the third most common choice. So it kind of confirms what I'd expected to find on that. Dogs show a wide range of trust in humans. How would you rate your dog's trust of humans? Very trusting, moderately trusting, a little trusting, not at all trusting, and selective in who he or she trusts. And this is also not that surprising, especially based on the other questionnaires that we had, and that is the large majority were very selective in who they would trust. And the rest of them formed pretty much a bell-shaped curve in the range of trustability of humans. A lot of people told us that my dog hates men, or a few hate women. And so that came so repeatedly that I decided, okay, let's ask. Does your dog show any difference in his or her response toward people based on the person's sex? And this is the breakdown. About half of them show no difference towards male or female. But of the other half, the vast majority show more negativity towards males than females. But there are a certain segment that actually are more negative towards females than males. Now, this cannot be attributed to being mistreated by men in the puppy mill in all cases, certainly, because in a lot of puppy mills, they're both owned and operated by women. And in fact, in the Amish community, where they're pretty rampant, a lot of girls work the mills too. So the hands-on are not always men. And in fact, it may be just the opposite, that they've never really encountered men before. So men give off, obviously, much more vibes, or much different vibes. Not more vibe. One more. Anyway, so they're scared of men in that respect too. Here's some comments on that particular question. She's scared to death of men. She only trusts my husband, and that's only 50% of the time. She'll growl at new men she encounters. The groomers reported that she doesn't like when men come into the shop. I know the puppy mill was run by a woman. Minnie will show less fear towards a male in my house and will calm down quicker if it is a male coming into the house. Missy will rarely enter a room if my husband or son are in it. She's more afraid of women. She will approach men who come into the house. We had a house sitter who brought her boyfriend with her. Sadie was very sociable with him. When the house sitter comes without him, she will not come into the room and stays in the back by the back door alone. She wouldn't let my husband touch her for 4 years. She barks and runs away from any males coming in the house still. We have one male friend that's very quiet and unassuming that she seems to have accepted as okay, but she still keeps her eye on him. Okay, so here's a biggie that you probably all know really well and is actually not well described in the first part of the questionnaire, the CBARC, and that is house training. So I asked people to rate it. Please check the level of house training, the going outside to urinate, have bowel movements, do your business. Your dog is now showing, and those are the choices I gave them. Fully house trained, which means they do all their business outside, and then I define mostly as 3/4 outside, somewhat as a half, poorly as 1/4 outside, and then I made this choice, not at all, no recognition or difference between inside and outside. And this is what we got back. 37% fully house trained, 42% mostly, which I guess is good. That's better than the bad ones down here. But also keep in mind that I worded the question specifically, your dog is now showing. So this is the picture of the dogs being 2 years into the household that they're in. Now, all of you who work in shelters know that when people are asking about house training, they aren't going to ask you, is he going to be 3/4 house trained or a half or a quarter? They want to know, will he be house trained or not? So I grouped these together to tell us what the answer is, and that is that about 2 years after you've adopted a puppy mill dog, the likelihood of him being house trained is about 1/3, and the likelihood of him still having accidents, or her, is about 2/3. Now that sounds bad. People don't generally want to adopt animals that aren't house trained, but I'll tell you that the people that adopt these dogs are the most loving and forgiving dogs or people you can imagine. They tell me on and on about how they buy lots of piddle pads, they've gotten real good with diapers, and they've gotten extra good at cleaning. But it's almost always done in a very positive note because of a lot of them, after describing all those issues, will then say at the end, but he's a puppy mill dog, what do you expect? So they're very forgiving, and it's just a wonderful thing. Now, don't get me wrong, they don't like the non-house training, because I did ask another question that I didn't put on here, and that is, if there's one thing you could change about your dog now, what would it be? House training, number one. So it's not like they love it, but they're very forgiving, the people that adopt these dogs. Now, a lot of dogs coming out of puppy mills, and you may know this, don't play. They don't get toys in puppy mills. They don't get any opportunity to play unless they invent little games in their little tiny enclosures. So I asked people, does your dog play, yes or no? And this is what we got back. About 2/3 of them do play, but about 1/3 of them don't play. And I think I put the comment section, I left some comments on here because even the ones that play in different ways. Does your dog play? Absolutely not, ever, sad. She will run and play with other dogs, but no interest in toys. Loves to play, loves her toys, will scamper with joy. She'll have a happy outburst while playing with her toys. That's, of course, what we want. She learned how to play by watching our other 2 dogs. Then she learned by interacting with them. Now she plays with other dogs and with toys. Initiates play with our other dog, but never with humans. Baby only plays alone. She loves stuffed toys and will drag them all over. Sometimes she throws them in the air. She doesn't seem to know what to do when you throw the toys for her to catch. She tries to play but is unsure how to do it. For the first 3 years she was here, Jilly did not know how to play. Now she loves little squeaky toys and will toss them up and try to keep them away from other dogs. So a lot of the dogs that have play impairment, so to speak, will actually learn to play, but a lot of them, unfortunately, decide, well, I wouldn't say decide, they just don't play. Eye contact. A lot of people would say my dog won't make eye contact with me. So I asked him on the second questionnaire, how frequently does your dog make eye contact and maintain it for at least a few seconds? And that is very frequently, fairly, occasionally, and never. And this is what we got back here. Very frequently, no hesitation is the plurality of the dogs here. Fairly frequently, occasionally, and never are significant. Now, this sounds academic, but I'm going to get back in the third talk as to why it's not. I'll give you just a little clue now, and that is eye contact is perceived by people, I should say by all social animals, including humans, as a positive interaction, unless it's a menacing type with, ears and all that. But it's a positive thing. So when your adopted dog will not look you in the face, whether you're consciously thinking it or not, you're perceiving that as rejection by your dog. And that can't be done with puppy mill dogs. You cannot hold them to the same standard of behavior as other normal dogs. And therefore, the people that call you back after 6 months or a year and say, this is obviously not working. He hates me. He won't look me in the eye. We know from doing these studies now that this is actually very normal. And it doesn't mean your dog hates you. It's just the way they are wired to maintain eye contact is very different than typical dogs. So it's a really important thing. It's not just, like I say, academic interest. I wanted to focus a little more on their cognitive abilities and their mental focus. So I asked them on this question to check off anything that your dog has done more than once. And I put here all kinds of things that you'd normally put: memory loss, confusion, loss of focus, irritability, that blank stare that we picked up on the first questionnaire, gets lost, sudden bursts of behavior. And this is what we got back for that. And it shows that confusion shows up pretty commonly. This confirms what we got on the first questionnaire, and that is that blank, dazed look that these dogs will often show, where you don't know what they're thinking or how their brain is dissociated or whatever. And by the way, I should point out this dazed look is not constant. It's just that they will adopt it at many parts of a day and maintain it for several minutes or longer. Shows very little emotion. That also showed up pretty well. And if you look at the last answer, my dog has shown none of the above, 43%. That leaves 57% do show some kind of cognitive dysfunction. Sleep disturbances. I wanted to know about this because, as you may know, in people with post-traumatic stress disorder, sleep disturbances are quite common. And I wanted to know more about what goes on with the recovered dogs. So I asked them to check off anything here that apply, that they see more than once, or more than once a month on this one. Howling, whimpering, sudden waking, physical activity like paddling legs, bad dreams, and of course that's presumed, nightmares, frequent waking up, all that kind of a thing. And this is what we got back here. Most of them didn't seem to show any, but a lot of them did show evidence which people were interpreting as nightmares and disturbed sleep, because they would wake up in the middle of howling or something like that. And so it's obviously a lot of speculation here on what those mean, but it does seem to follow the pattern that humans that go through psychological trauma do also. Here's another example. This is Honey Girl, adopted 15 months prior to me visiting her in her home. Slowly bonded with the wife, but not her husband. Still won't let the husband touch her. Hides whenever guests come to visit. That's her right there. She would have stayed in that back corner as I stood in this corner with the door until I asked the wife to pick her up and bring her toward me. And this is over the wife's shoulder. You can still see Honey Girl just arching back to get away from me like I'm terrifying. And the wife told me, quote, reminds me of an autistic child, a lot like, which made me, along with our first questionnaire, want to know more about autistic type things. So I asked them on this question, considering your dog's behavior, have you considered it to resemble any of the following human conditions? And I gave them a whole bunch of choices, Alzheimer's, attention deficit, autism, dementia, mental retardation, senility. And by the way, of course, a lot of these overlap, dementia and senility, for example. But I just want to know how people responded to this. And this is what we got back. Fortunately, none of them are too high, but the one does confirm my main suspicion, and that is 11% of people look at the behavior their puppy mill rescue dogs show as autistic-like. And here are some comments that give you a real good description of this. I work with autistic children, and his pacing in circles, avoidance of human contact, avoidance of eye contact have seemed autistic-like. She seems like a catatonic schizophrenic, turning her back on people. She's afraid of open space, agoraphobic. If I had to make an analogy, I'd say she most resembles someone with PTSD, sudden and severe startle response, need to isolate to diminish outside stimulation, staring at walls, great fear of new situations. By the way, this is what I study the most, and I stupidly forgot to put it on the questionnaire. This particular person just added it in his comment section, so I feel like an idiot there. But sometimes she seems like an empty shell with no emotion. Other times she can seem happy and seem to enjoy life to the best of her ability. And we call her our little autistic girl. She doesn't take in the world the way a normal happy-go-lucky dog does. Everything is totally new to her, and every experience is a first, so she's sort of in a world of her own. This is Joey, and Joey's owner wrote me a letter, and I just wanted to read it to you, which gives you a basic overall description of the damage that puppy mills will cause. There was something about Joey that just didn't work. It was when Tinkerbell came to me in July of this year that I knew what Joey's problem was. Joey's brain did not develop properly. He tried to become all the dog he could be with the help of my other animal companions, but he could only get so far, and then as he got older, he seemed to regress. When Tinkerbell came, I saw the difference. She's playful and full of life and is becoming a real dog. She does all the normal things that dogs do, such as groom, scratch and itch, bark, run and jump, get the ball. Joey did none of these things. In the 3 years he was with me, I never saw him scratch one itch. I realized that all this time he was just existing in his safe place that I created for him. It was a lot like what we see in humans as Alzheimer's. Joey did not live a life. He just existed. And if that's not depressing enough, here's Frida, who's a collie. I adopted a collie. This is the man who adopted her, obviously. I adopted a collie that had been rescued from a puppy mill some 3 months before. Once rescued, she'd been kept in a kennel at a vet's office with some free time outside in a fenced yard with other rescued dogs. I love collies, but how shocked and unprepared I was when I got this dog home and no one told me what to expect. At first, she was afraid to go into the house. Once I got her in the door, she made herself an invisible cage on a 5 by 7 foot rug I had in my foyer and did not move from there for hours. I finally coaxed her into the living area of the house. She was afraid of everything, the TV, the ceiling fan, the porcelain dog dish, the bathroom, the kitchen, etc. She retreated into a dark corner of my house. She's afraid of people and will shy away when she sees anyone in the street. She gets car sick. If we are outside on a day where there's garbage collection in my neighborhood and hears the noises of people taking out the trash cans, opening their garage doors, etc., she'll start to salivate from sheer nervousness and try to run home. What is even most sad is that she has none of the collie instincts. She was robbed of those. No instinct to herd, to protect, to bark, nothing. She hardly ever wags her tail and does not know how to play with toys. My heart breaks that I cannot get through to her. She loves being brushed when I bring out the brush. We spend our best times together. This is the one time in the day that she actually seems to relax in my company. I do work Monday through Friday, some 10 hours a day. I have another well-socialized dog at home, but even though he tries to get her to play, she usually just lies down and ignores him. So I don't need to tell all you this, but when I give this lecture and present these cases to people who aren't really in the know, I just point out that if you buy a puppy from a pet store, this is what you're helping to create. It's just horribly, horribly tragic. Pictures of puppy mills, you've all seen these, but I transposed these with pictures that I took out of a catalog of a kennel, professional kennel supplier. And the reason I did this is that a lot of people that run these puppy mills have these real clean, shiny facilities, and they will say, look, come out, my place isn't a puppy mill, this place is sparkling clean. And I've walked through these places, and they are clean. But the problem is if you walk down that particular hallway, it's like walking down the middle hallway of a shelter. You've got dogs howling on both sides of you just to come over and give them some attention because they're so starved for affection. And so the reason I put this up here is to illustrate that it doesn't matter that the puppy mill is dirty or clean. The psychological damage can be just as traumatizing because it comes from other things than just feces on the floor. Okay, so let's switch over to hoarding and talk about them, which we don't have as much research data on, but I'll give you what we've been able to start to collect. By the way, illustrations here, that's the classic. Sometimes they're kept in vehicles, sometimes they're kept in cages in the house or barn or whatever, and then sometimes they're hoarded outside. So hoarding environments can actually be quite variable. One little note here. I just want to point out how unique hoarding is. There's no other type of abuse or neglect where there's a wider gulf between the intent to benefit the animal and the harm inflicted on the animal. So I made this little chart here. This is harm inflicted on the animal, and this is the intent to help the animal. And there's a number of things that go right up here with the high degree of harm, low degree of intent to help, and that is abuse, puppy mills, dog fighting, factory farming. They all go up there. On the other side is this, which is a high intent to help with a very low degree of harm inflicted, and that's veterinary care, animal rescue, and shelters. And this is where hoarding sits, right up there. And that is that the self-proclaimed intent to help is as high as it can get in most of these hoarders, but also the harm is as high as it can get because in over half the cases, dead animals are found. You can't get any worse than that. So this is a very unique situation, which, as you all know, is just starting to be understood better. Species hoarded, you probably all know this. Dogs and cats are, of course, the most common. Also, rabbits are fairly common. This comes from a photo we helped the rescue in Reno, Nevada of hundreds, I forget exactly, of rabbits. Pigs are also hoarded, and birds. And this is really sad because birds, as you all know, especially the parrots, can live 60, 70 years. And when we fret that dogs live 7, 8 years of their breeding life in a puppy mill, it's bad. But when you're stuck for 70 years in a parrot mill, I can't even imagine what that's like. And as you all know, parrots are very intelligent and need a lot of stimulation. And it's just a horrible, horrible thing that just doesn't get near enough press. Okay, relevant to what we see when these animals come out of the hoarding situation is how did they get there? And there's a number of ways. You probably all know these things. From neighbors and the general public who want or need to relinquish their pets but don't want to take them to the shelter. People who bring homeless animals to them. And both of these are very often used as sort of a guise to draw animals in. The people running the hoarding place say that they are a shelter or a sanctuary, and very often they're not. Obtained as strays through free to good home ads, maybe housed pets that were stolen or rescued. There are people that do go out in individual yards and steal animals to bring them back to their hoarding facility because in their mind they can take better care than the animal sitting in the yard there. And then lastly, the animals breed among themselves in the hoarding environment. That's one of the more obvious ones. Okay, so harm to the animals, it comes, just a couple comments here. In humans, and this sort of reiterates the puppy mill situation, it's well established that in a group of individuals all going through the same stress, there's a wide array of responses, not just the numbers that I told you have ongoing effects, but the different kinds of responses are very different, and that's what we see in hoarded animals, and as I just showed you in puppy mill animals. And after the rescue, some of the animals interact with people and behave as if nothing unpleasant ever happened, while others show severe and persistent adverse psychological and physical effects. By the way, that's true for puppy mills, too. You probably all know this, that right after rescue, some of these dogs will bounce up to you with tails wagging, and you could never imagine they were in any kind of bad situation. And others, of course, are just petrified and won't come near you and are just trembling like you're going to kill them. Gary Petronic found that 80% of hoarding cases, in 80%, animals were found dead or in poor condition, very malnourished, obvious disease or injury. And he found that 59% had actual deceased animals. There's just one story there of a obviously real bad case of only 2 surviving out of, I think, 46. Many animals, and you all know this, being recovered are in such bad condition that euthanasia is the only humane option. Physical and psychological harm, we'll look at the physical harm first. Okay, doing good on time. The hoarding conditions that contribute to the physical harm are numerous. One is the unsanitary bedding and flooring. There's prolonged exposure to the skin and the feet that these animals have to walk on, and then, of course, they sleep on a lot of these surfaces, too. Overcrowding, where there's inadequate, overcrowded housing, creates physical injury from aggressive encounters and is further aggravated in situations where there's heavy competition for limited food, which isn't the case in all hoarding situations, but in many. Insufficient drinkable water and edible food leads to dehydration, chronic malnutrition, or starvation, which has an impairing effect on the immune function, wound healing. Spread of infectious and parasitic diseases promoted by, and you all know this, close confinement and interaction, accumulated fecal material, rotting food, and insects and rodents. And then disrupted sleep. Large numbers of free-roaming animals are not conducive to proper rest and healthy sleep. This is not like an army barracks where at 10 o'clock everybody goes to bed and sleeps. This is the situation where you're trying to sleep, but other animals decide it's time to get up and move around. So sleep is very impaired. Poor air quality, this is, of course, mainly because of ammonia. Ammonia levels above 25 parts per million begin to cause irritation of the respiratory tract, and levels over 150 have been found at documented at hoarding sites. And then studies have shown that at less than 100 parts per million, it can have detrimental effects on appetite and weight gain in farm animals. And so we may be seeing that some of the malnutrition hoarding rescues aren't due to the unavailability of food, but are due to the fact that they've got something impairing their appetite to where they just aren't going to eat. And then, of course, inadequate veterinary care. Lack of preventive veterinary care like vaccines and antiparasitics, of course, allow these animals to get ill. And then, of course, when they're ill, their number of times they're taken to the vet are minuscule. Okay, and then real quickly, just through the different types of physical harm, in a general level, malnourished and starved, parasites of all types, roundworms, coccidiosis, giardia, heartworm, and all the external parasites. Oral disease, just like puppy mill rescues, are horrendous. Dental disease with loss of many teeth and sometimes parts of the jaw. Gingivitis and stomatitis, often severe and very common. Skin, won't go through all these, but just ravaged. Eyes, infections, conjunctivitis, corneal ulcers, real common. Infections may be so severe that the eyes are blinded and may be lost altogether. Viral infections, this is a no-brainer, FELV and especially upper respiratory. Ears, infections, mites, and genitourinary tracts infections, and also trauma from forced matings among a lot of these animals that are just kind of wild animals. So just some pictures of some hoarding rescues. This is just an obvious skin problem. This is scabies here. And you've all seen this. This is the really ugly situation of cats with upper respiratory that just devastate them. That's a paralyzed rabbit from the Reno Rabbit Rescue, just couldn't get around. And rats are hoarded too. This is one that is suffering from a horrible skin disease and probably a lot of other things too. By the way, I should mention, not that it's relevant to anything, but in the, I forget which Hoarding TV show, there was one, I think it was last season, where the big finale was a rat hoarding situation. Did anybody see that? They built it up all season, you know, like, oh my God, you'll want to see this. And it's like, it's this guy that has like 200-300 rats, maybe more, I forget. And it was like considered the most horrible thing. Well, I'm a rat lover, and I look at that and I go, wow, that is so cool, you know. But it's not, because they're sick and all that kind of thing. But having that many rats, if they were healthy and well cared for, would be so cool. Rats are so cool. If you need a pet that's just like a real small dog, get a rat. My rats run free in my house, and they chase my cats. So it's kind of fun. You have to get a dustbuster, though, because they do leave their little poops around. But they're always hard, so, you know, you just scoop them up. But it's pretty awesome. And I know I'm sounding weird, but rats are the coolest. Okay, and then sadly, this is from Melinda Merck's textbook, just a picture of cannibalism, because things really get ugly in terms of food. Okay, so let's look at some of the ones we've dealt with at Best Friends. I picked 3 different hoarding situations. 64 dogs from Winnipeg, Canada, 121 dogs from an Arkansas rescue, and a rescue out of the Arizona desert of 101. These are all dogs. I'll get to cats in just a second. So here's the 5 dogs, or just to give you 5 of the 64 Winnipeg dogs, and to show you the physical problems that we had with these guys. Hammond, all teeth very worn, fractured teeth, dental disease, GI disease, bloody mucousy, diarrhea. GDV, overweight. Zoroaster, broken and missing teeth. Vera, Campylobacter, GI disease, dental disease. Emery, mammary cancer, skin masses and abscess, dental disease, otitis externa, hypertension, overweight, and Catalina, GI disease. Now, keep in mind, because I'll come back in just a second, keep in mind Emery here, who had the worst physical problems of all these dogs. The Arkansas rescue, by the way, the Winnipeg rescue was in a very small room with about I think 700 dogs in the entire operation, so to speak, and we got, as I say, that many of them. But it was dark, there were no windows, and it was just a horrible, horrible mess. Arkansas, the only information we got was that, a terrible hoarding situation. And these dogs, we treated them all for scabies because some of them were positive for scabies. But out of Arkansas, you can probably imagine heartworm positive, but also Ehrlichia positive, otitis externa, Clostridium, diarrhea, just a mess. And that's the kind of thing, once again, that comes out of a hoarding situation. And then out of the Arizona desert, this is 101 dogs with no shade. And if you've ever been in Arizona, having no shade is absolute torture. I mean, we're in the southern part of Utah, and our summers get up to like 107, 108, and we're at the high desert, and that is devastating, but Arizona's worse. But anyway, what's interesting, and then also no clean water, green slime with many dead mice, and they were only fed once or twice a week. But look at this. Of the 5 dogs that we got out of that rescue, only one of them had a physical problem. And that was Omega, that was heartworm positive. But all the other ones actually had a normal physical exam. And that is in a brutal environment for dogs to be kept. Okay, this is Pahrump, Nevada, which is in the desert on the west side of Nevada. And we were called in here to help with a rescue of hoarded cats that numbered around 900. And this was one of those fake sanctuaries where the lady advertised herself as being a sanctuary for cats. If you no longer could keep them, they'd come and we'd love them. In fact, she called herself Flock, which stood for the love of cats and kittens. And this is where they ended up. And the cats ran free on the desert compound with a big fence around it. They had some rooms to go in, but they were sweltering hot. And that's Sherry, one of our behavior consultants at Best Friends. But what was interesting about this is if you walked onto the compound here, just like Sherry demonstrates, you were like a cat magnet. These cats were so starved for attention because so many of them had been, maybe all of them, had been owned by somebody and were very familiar with people. So if you walked in, they would just be all over you. And if you stooped down, they would be on your shoulders and back. I mean, they were just starved for human attention. They were sadly starved for food too, but I just found it dramatic. And it was kind of interesting, almost funny, but not funny. When I went in there and I was petting the cats, I would have, my hands petting one cat, and then there'd be like 20 other cats all waiting to be petted. And it was the first time in my life that I actually thought that God gave us too few arms. Because every time I had to pet a new one, I had to stop petting this one, and I just felt like I need to be petting all these guys. They were just so affectionate. Now, some of them were terrified and ran off to the back part of the compound and hid from us. That's why it was hard to get an accurate count of how many were there. Here are just some of the cats that were there. There's another one that we had to net with a tumor. And this is one that we gave the name of Cover Girl because she became sort of our photographic image of the Pahrump Hoarding rescue. And she was, as you can tell there, about one breath away from dying, weak, FELV positive, and just a horrible, horrible situation. Best Friend study of psychological and physical health characteristics after your rescue adoption. This is a look at the physical health of these cats, and what we were able to do is get 94 of the adopters to answer a questionnaire, and we compared them with a control group that I built of just people that I solicited with normal, non-traumatized cats, and I had them fill out the same questionnaire. And on the health issue, and I should point out, average 1.2 years after the rescue that we collected this information. And so here's what we got. In the control cats, the number of health problems were about 16% there. But 1.2 years after rescue, the hoarded cats, 53% of them were still showing significant health issues. So those health issues that come out with the cats, obviously some resolve, but a lot don't. Now I broke it down here and asked the people, of course, to tell me what the problems were, and those are probably too small to read, but everything from allergy to arthritis, overweight, that's actually the biggest one among non-hoarded cats, and then FELV, heart disease, lower urinary tract, and that's the control cats. This is the Pahrump hoarded cats, and what we've got, of course, is upper respiratory, ocular disease, dental disease, oral non-dental disease, skin disease, ear disease, overweight, interestingly, although it wasn't statistically significant, was actually more in the hoarded cats 1.2 years after the rescue. GI disease, sky high, and miscellaneous. So a lot of these were very, very, very sky high compared to normal. Some of them, again, statistical significance didn't show them to be actually different, but lower urinary tract disease much higher in the control cats than the hoarded cats. So this is Cover Girl, and that's Cover Girl after a year of being able to be saved. As you all know, in your shelter situation, you don't all have the facilities to keep every one of these borderline cats, but we did, and so she came through. She only lived, sadly, about a year because of her leukemia virus, but you can see she thrived really nicely, so that was really great. Okay, so that was the physical harm. Let's look at the psychological harm. First of all, there's a difference between the psychological and the physical harm to hoarded animals. The physical harm happens when they're at the facility. That's where they are harmed. They may carry some of that out with them, but that's where the harm occurs. And that's a little different than the psychological harm, where you get harm while in the hoarding environment, but also as they come out, and I should point out this is actually true for puppy mill dogs too, but there's psychological harm in the move to a new environment too. So the harm isn't only what happens at the facility. Now, the harm while at the hoarding facility comes from a lot of different stressors. You know all these probably without me even mentioning. Overcrowding, noise, being picked on or intimidated by stronger individuals with limited ability to escape, competition for resources like food, resting and sleeping areas, deprivation of human companionship, the degree of distress dependent on the socialization history of the animal, of course, because if they're born in the environment, they're not socialized to humans, then the deprivation of human companionship is not going to be as harmful. Confinement for excessive periods or in extremely restricted space, small cages or crates, noxious environmental factors, filth, dampness, heat, cold, hardness, extreme boredom for the confined animals, and unnatural light cycles. Excessive darkness or constant light are found commonly in these hoarding facilities. And one other note is that the effects of emotional distress cross over into the physical, where we see immunosuppression, increased susceptibility to diseases, and impaired healing and slowed recovery from disease and injury. So the psychological harm can contribute to the animal's physical harm. Okay, so the psychological harm that animals experience after removal from the hoarding environment has two causes. One is that the animal's unfamiliar, and that is not socialized or adapted to, the stimuli and events encountered on the outside or in the normal pet environment, and the animal experiences psychological harm and suffering as long as that stimuli and the events continue to be perceived as threatening, which may or may not diminish over time. And by the way, this is also true for the puppy mill dogs too, and that is that the things that they encounter in their life before getting out are very different than what they encounter when they get out. Now, hoarded animals have some sense of what a house structure is, in most cases, and some of the normal things in life. But I should have pointed out when I was talking about puppy mill dogs, there's almost nothing in the world that a puppy mill dog coming out has ever seen before in their life other than human beings. Meaning that the things we take for granted, like solid floors, ceilings, ceiling fans, glass, clear glass that you can't walk through, they've never seen that in their lives. So everything is foreign. That's why when I read you Frida's story, she was scared of everything. The ceiling fan, the porcelain disc, everything. They've never seen this before. It is a tremendous shock. Hoarding animals have a little more sense of some normalcy, but the transition is still huge. The other thing that can happen is that the behavior that the animal performed naturally in the hoarding environment and considers normal is not always desired when they come out. And so there's a lot of frustration on the hoarder, on the adopter's part, of trying to get them to stop doing certain things. And those certain things are the obvious, like urinating and defecating all over, chewing up the furniture, or having fights with the other dogs. All those things are part of their normal life, but it's not what we want in their life. So if you don't have a good-hearted adopter and they start punishing and that kind of a thing, then they're just making this poor animal suffer more. Human contact for hoarded animals can vary a lot. Some do interact with the owners, but some are kept indoors in cages, and some are housed outdoor, like the Pahrump Nevada or backyard dogs, and others are in stacked cages and barns. So when hoarding rescues are made, it's often difficult to know if they've ever had physical contact with a human being before, because, as we know, some hoarders claim, well, they almost all claim to love their animals, and some will live in that environment and interact with them. So you don't need a whole lot of human interaction to become socialized to humans. But the problem is there's no measure of that when they come out, so we don't know how difficult the adjustment to being with humans is going to be. We know more about the puppy mills because they're more standardized in terms of the minimal human contact. The hoarding is the one that's quite variable in how much the humans interact. Major contributor to post-traumatic, I already told you, inadequate socialization with humans. That applies to dogs, cats, and rabbits. Rescued animals frequently demonstrate fearful responses to humans. Even the gentlest handling may cause severe fear and stress, may react with withdrawal, escape attempts, freezing, shutting down, manic frenzy of escape behavior or aggressive behavior, and extreme fear reactions, especially when involving aggression, as you all know, lessen the chances for adoption and increase the chance for euthanasia. So, behavioral assessments of groups of dogs from the same situation. Well, let's look at the same dogs we looked at the physical problems, and that's the Winnipeg 64. This is the behavior evaluation I did with them, where I looked at friendliness, excitability, fearfulness, calmness, submissiveness, and aggression. And I actually was more focused on those three things: friendliness, excitability, and fearfulness. And if you want to, let's break it down and look at the individual dogs for each trait. We've got, in friendliness, we've got a range all the way from as high as Zoroaster with the highest degree of friendliness down to Winter. Now, I should point out, this is a difficulty with assessing friendliness, is very often people interpret low friendliness as unfriendly. That's not the case. Being low on friendliness just simply means they didn't express openly friendliness, not that they were mean to me when I was doing the test or anything like that. So Winter there just simply was very stoic, not showing any degree of friendliness, whereas Zoroaster was tail waggy and quite responsive. Then on the excitability, the lowest was Emery there, and Winter was the one that had the highest excitability, and that, of course, was responsiveness to other sounds and things that were going on in the environment as we were doing the testing. And then fearfulness, lowest of Emery, and the highest of Winter. So if you put these all together, here's what we've got. Emery scored the second highest on friendliness and the lowest on the other values that we don't want to score high, whereas at the other end of the spectrum, Winter, very low on friendliness and unfortunately very high on excitability and fearfulness. And the reason I told you to remember Emery is that for reasons I can't explain, Emery had the best psychological health, but Emery was the one, as I told you, had the worst physical health of all the dogs. So I don't know what that means, and it may be just a fluke in this situation, but found it kind of interesting. So the study that we just started with another collaborative effort, myself and Deb Duffy and James Serple, is a similar study on rescued hoarded dogs. And we have very little information back yet. This is actually just a summary from the first few entries into the SurveyMonkey site, where I asked them what was the what were the problems that you encountered or your dog encountered when you adopted him. And I just put this up here just to show that behavioral, emotional, psychological problems came out 88%. But that's a very low number of dogs. That's just the first 16 dogs in our study. We're up to about 150 now, but I just don't have the data yet for that. Here are some comments, though. Rather than have the numbers that I don't have, I picked out some comments to give you some ideas about the dogs in the study. And these, of course, are descriptions by the owners of their dogs. Extremely frightened of everything and everyone, frightened to eat, even if by herself, feral by all counts. He was so fearful that he would fall over and scream at anything different in his environment, painfully shy, eventually became aggressive with fear. No socialization, emotionally shut down, had never been inside a home before. All normal living experiences were foreign to her. Withdrawn from humans and animals, afraid of moderate to loud noises, refusal to go outside, hid under furniture, acted like he was constantly in trouble or danger. Very, very scared, wouldn't stop trembling, extremely afraid of people, no confidence, total unfamiliarity with steps, toys, surroundings, extremely frightened, would not eat, only enough to stay alive. She was not social, afraid of everything, did not know how to walk on a leash. When you tried to put a collar or leash on her, she'd roll over and play dead. She did not know how to play, still is trying to figure it out. When we first went to adopt her, she was laying in the back of her cage, facing the wall, looking away from all the people. All the other dogs were in the front of the cages barking as if to say, pick me, not her. She wanted no part of the people or the process. And then I found a number of ones related, like we found with the puppy mill dogs, that showed aversion to human touch, fearful of human physical contact, cannot be touched by human hands, hypersensitive to being touched by human hands, spins and bites his tail if touched by hands, does not like to be handled, clip nails, cleaning teeth, ear clean. So there seem to be some similarities with certainly with the puppy mill rescued dogs as we're seeing in the hoarding dogs. Here's Pahrump looking at the psychological aspects. We used a feline sociability test. It's actually called the feline temperament profile, but all it tests for is sociability, so I'm calling it a sociability test. This is where you do certain things and see what the animal's reactions were. This is just one that says after approaching the cat, getting the cat to approach you, extend your hand and check off the cat's response. And I only put this up here just to show how similar the hoarded and the control cats are. There were no statistical significant differences in that particular group there. And likewise, move away from the cat, drag a piece of string along the floor to initiate play, or toss a ball, crumpled paper, check off the response. And this is play, which unlike puppy mill dogs that don't play, the hoarded cats seem to respond to the drag string very similarly. But here's where differences showed up. Sit down and place the cat in your lap facing you, stroke the cat, and check off the cat's response. And look at what happened here. The cats that jumped off, and this is statistically significant, the ones that jumped off were the control cats, whereas the ones that didn't jump off were far more likely to be the hoarded cats. And on a similar note here, place the cat on the floor next to the chair. This is the step that comes after putting it in the lap. Put the cat on the floor next to the chair, call and beckon with your hands, and check off the cat's response. And once again, look at this. The hoarded cats were the quickest ones to jump up. Also, of course, the ones that least likely to stay on the floor and maintain eye contact. But they would jump up at statistically significant, elevated incidence than normal pet cats. So, I'll get back to that in just a second. Responses to unfamiliar people. Now, this is not part of the original profile. I added some questions here. And I put here, then this was on the agree to disagree scale. In response to encountering an unfamiliar person, my cat approaches the person eagerly and with no hesitation. And the number of strongly agree there is, as you can see, hoarded cats did it more than the control cats. And that actually is statistically significant. And then on this question, my cat is extremely friendly toward unfamiliar people. Again, the hoarded cats were more than the non-hoarded normal pet cats. So we found that hoarded cats are significant, at least, and I should specify, this is the Pahrump, Nevada desert hoarded cats, not every hoarded cat in every situation. But the hoarded cats from this particular environment are significantly more friendly to unfamiliar people than our non-hoarded cats. Now, that makes no sense, except for this. And that is a study by Irene Rocklitz and her colleagues, where they studied the effects of quarantine on cats and their owners when they went to the UK, when they had the full quarantine in effect for the rabies quarantine. And this is what they found. 3 months after the cats left quarantine, they were more affectionate than before quarantine. And when they left quarantine and 3 months later, the cats spent more time with their owners than before quarantine. So I think there's some resemblance here. These are cats that are quarantined for 6 months and then are put back with their owners, and they actually now show more affection, more closeness, than before the quarantine started. So the cats that went through the time at Pahrump, where they left their owners and then were without human contact for any number of months or years, may be showing that same effect of increased affection towards people, because they do test out to be more affectionate towards unfamiliar people. Now, how about to other cats? In response to encountering another cat, my cat approaches the other cat eagerly and with no hesitation. Hoarded cats more. My cat is extremely friendly toward other cats. Hoarded cats, actually much more. So hoarded cats are significantly more friendly to other cats than our non-hoarded cats, at least the cats from Pahrump, Nevada. Behavior problems, I compared all these, and actually a few more, where I had people rate, are they seeing this in their cats? And these are all statistically non-significant. So we found that among the behavior problems that I chose to ask about at least, there were no significant differences between the hoarded and non-hoarded cats. And then I asked them on a big list of things your cat might be fearful of to tell me if their cats were fearful or not of those, and also graded how fearful too. And this is what we found. Out of all these, the only ones with statistical significance are 3. These 2 showed more fear in hoarded cats, and that's fear of loud noises and the vacuum cleaner. But I made a last choice for them, which was, instead of anything specific, I put seemingly everything. And look at what happened here. The ones that were non-hoarded, the control cats, actually scored higher on the fearful of seemingly everything than the hoarded cats. I don't have an explanation for that. And then the last thing is this. I just wanted to know, because this kind of thing is kind of informative. I asked them, has your cat's behavior or demeanor ever caused any visitor to your home to comment on the unusual nature of what they've seen? Now, of course, that could be good or bad. But most of them said no. But of the ones that said yes, I said, what was said? And this is a few of the comments that I picked out. She doesn't like people or doesn't like to be petted. That cat is sketchy. I think they meant skittish. But mostly cat goes under bed when someone comes to house. They commented on how scared he is, asked, where is she, and extremely timid. Then we had these. Knowing her background or not, people comment on how friendly she is. Your cat is too lovable. What's wrong with him? And your cat is a slut for affection. How do I get him to leave me alone? She is insanely friendly and acts like a dog. She's so lovable and never stops purring, rolling, or kneading. No one believes that she was once feral. And I finished on time. So I'm more than happy to... if you've got any contacts with anybody who's adopted hoarded dogs, I would just ask you if you could pass along the info on our study, because the more dogs we get in our study, of course, the more accurate the ultimate results.